I know that people have been talking about Seiya Suzuki and him maybe being a Cub. When the news broke, what did you immediately think?
I was very excited about it, partially because I've been somewhat obsessively kind of covering that possibility, and so I did the same thing with Shohei Ohtani a few years ago, and then that didn't come to fruition. So it sort of felt like, oh darn, like I've been telling everybody this guy would be perfect, and then it didn't happen. So with this one, I think it's really interesting on a number of different levels because everyone there was the Marcus Stroman signing right there at kind of the 11th hour before the lockout. And then you have, 3 months of nothing. And so I think a lot of people sort of forgot about that. So the Cubs didn't really get splashy right out of it. And everybody's like, oh, here we go again. They're not going to make any moves. What's happening? And this really changed the tenor of the second off season here for them, I think. Really makes it look, it's a significant spend. It's a guy who checks a lot of boxes for them and really signals that, hey, especially with the no trade clause being in there, that they're very intent on competing right away and for at least the next 5 years, right? Ideally beyond that, but it's a 5-year deal. So I think it's excellent. And to me, it portends other deals because the Cubs, as they are made up right now, are not by any stretch a guarantee to win the Central, let alone to make any real noise in the National League beyond that. So I think it's a sign that more stuff's coming.
For Cubs fans who haven't done the deep dive on Suzuki, what are the Cubs fans getting?
Well, you're looking at kind of a potential, 5-tool, and I think certainly some of this translate literally and figuratively, right? These numbers are all from NPB, but really patient plate approach. It's a guy who's over the last 3 years, he's walked significantly more than he struck out. The last 2 years are about even, but 3 years ago he really jumped up. Statistically speaking, you're looking at 91 homers, 82 doubles last 3 years combined. Only 27 years old, so he's significantly younger. And here's the other thing: a lot of people, a lot of times, they think about Japanese players coming over, and due to the nature of their contracts there, you typically don't see those guys come over till they're maybe in their 30s. So this is someone who's entering his athletic prime versus kind of sunsetting on it. I think that's going to be very helpful. A lot of speed, strong arm, corner outfield type. So I think what you're looking at is very possibly someone who could supplant Jason Hayward as the everyday right fielder, maybe make Hayward more of a platoon option, which probably plays up to his strengths a little bit better as well. Somebody who can man at least 2 outfield positions and, again, a little bit of speed. So really just, again, outside of being a right-handed hitter, which I know the Cubs need a lot of lefty power, he's one of those guys, and, again, high contact, not a big strikeout guy. So really, really something that the Cubs have been looking for a long time, and I think he's someone who fills those needs and should carry them through kind of this next few years.
How do you balance what you see from a player playing in a foreign league versus what they're going to go up against in Major League Baseball?
I think that the toughest part there is just, outside of, we could look at field dimensions, we could talk about some of the things like, I think culturally there's a big shift as well. And that takes, it doesn't matter where you're coming from, whether it be the Dominican or Japan or anything like that, language barriers and just, again, the way we do things here, right, are different. You have to adjust to that. But, I think when you talk about in Japan, they generally go with a 6-man rotation. That's a little bit different. But the way we do things in the States now that the pitchers have been going up, the average fastball is this much higher. And we've got a lot of Japanese pitchers out there who are throwing really, really hard as well. So I do think, though, just the elite level of talent, think about it like maybe moving from Division II to Division I, or the FCS to FBS at a smaller school, or to a Power 5, if we're trying to put these in more terms that people are used to seeing. It's just an overall deeper, higher level of talent. And so that can be difficult to adjust. But as with anything else, the best players are the best players no matter what. Are there a few shots that maybe were homers in Japan that'll be gap shots and doubles here? Yeah, that could happen. But I think when you look at a guy like this who comes over with that kind of plate approach, that translates, right? Power doesn't always translate. Sometimes those strikeout numbers go up, but if you're someone who can go in there and handle the bat with that contact approach and who's willing to wait out walks, those kind of things come over really well. And I think that's what Suzuki brings probably more than anything. That's what people should be excited about.
I spent a lot of time this morning looking at highlights of him, and obviously it's highlights. It's him hitting home runs. It's him hitting doubles in the gap off the wall, like all of that stuff. I love his swing. I love it because there's a fluidity to it. I love that when he does his leg kick, he's got really good balance, and the follow through and finish of it, it's got some theater to it, and I dig that too. So I'm looking forward to, like, as far as right-handed swings go, I don't think a lot of them are pretty. I think his swing is.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with him, and you see this pretty compact guy, right? 5'11", maybe $185. Looks like he's listed around $185. It looks like he's put on a little bit more muscle. So maybe pushing 200 even. So kind of that squat kind of a dude who's really able, as you said, he's fluid, but there's not a lot of elbows and knees and length. You see these guys that just have a lot of long levers, and sometimes that can be difficult with the timing. So when you're looking at that short, compact kind of player, he can really get to it quickly. I certainly don't want to draw any direct comparisons, to an Ichiro or someone like that. They're very different in that regard. But you talk about somebody whose skill was able to translate immediately just because of the way he played. I think there's a lot of this here, and I think he's a guy who's going to bring some flair. He's got a little bit of that panache, if you will, that certain je ne sais quoi.
Nice.
If pardon my French, but who can come in and he did. When he spoke about where he was going to make his choice, he talked about wanting the culture and the atmosphere, the environment. I think a lot of people might have heard that and said, "Oh, he's looking to make sure he can have strong Japanese culture." And not to say that Chicago doesn't have, it's a complete melting pot, so you can find just about any culture worldwide that you would look for. But typically you think of the West Coast when you think of strong Japanese populations. But I think it was more one of those where he wants a place that, and this is becoming a little bit overused, but I still love it, just a place that he can vibe, that he and his wife can kind of settle in and have a second home during the season and just really soak in the atmosphere of the city. We heard about that from Marcus Stroman, and I think that's a similar decision here. So this is a guy who's coming to Chicago because he wants to be in Chicago. It's not just a matter of the Cubs saying, "Hey, we're going to throw more money at you than anybody else." So I think that's pretty cool too. As you see that anytime it just shows that he really wants to be there, I think that may help with his acclimation process.
Evan Altman joining me here on The Score. He's the editor-in-chief of Cubs Insider. You can check him out on Twitter at @DEvanAltman. What do you believe, or what do you know about what Anthony Rizzo was offered last year by the Cubs?
I mean, I think the reports that are out there have been accurate. That it was something in the neighborhood. Interestingly enough, about some of the reports about Suzuki, and I think we've seen the numbers kind of vacillate a little bit, perhaps because of the posting fee. But if you look at about a $70 million in there, and I know it's kind of interesting now to look at it given what he got from the Yankees.
Right.
And say, oh my goodness, he should have taken that. But I also think, there's a certain measure of pride. We could call it ego, but I think a lot of it too is you don't get to that level in any sport by being someone who's unwilling to take risks and by being someone who's not supremely confident in your own abilities and your own value and contributions. And I think when you look at it, though, yes, it's easy to say he should have just taken that deal. I think at the time, before his performance from last year and everything else, that certainly looked like it was kind of a low offer. But I also think there's something to be said for the value intrinsically that he brought to the Cubs outside of his production, to the community and to the organization, and what he had meant to it. And that's not there with the Yankees or really any other team. At that point, he becomes now a player whose value is based solely on what his production is. And so I do think there's a premium. Is that, difference of $38 million or so? Probably not. But, I think it's kind of apples and oranges, both of which are fruits. So I guess we can compare them to some extent. But, it's definitely interesting to see how that worked and slightly different from what we saw with Kyle Schwarber.
I want to go back to what you were saying about the Cubs trying to be competitive, and maybe this is a signal that they'll be competitive. I'm looking at them right now, Evan, and I look at a division. They're two teams that completely just punted on the 2022 season. The Reds and the Pirates are like, we're good. We're not going to compete. Don't worry about us. I wonder what type of impact that has on Jed and him building specifically for 2022. Obviously, he's got to have a big picture. Like, he's got to see the mosaic, and he's got to think beyond 2022. But when you know for sure the two teams aren't competing, it increases your odds of winning the division. So what does that do to how you put together your team?
Yeah, I think that's got to be huge, right? And look at one of the first, or really the first significant move the Cubs made in the offseason. It was picking up Wade Miley off waivers because the Reds didn't want to pay him $10 million, right, to be a really competent starter. They got rid of Miley and they traded off Tucker Barnhart. And I think you kind of saw it at the time. I knew at the time that they were going to just be selling everything off, and we've seen that come to fruition.
Yeah, I think Amir Garrett just went to Kansas City too.
Which is wild. Again, well, he can after that video. I interacted with him the other day on Twitter because he had a weird video throwing plyos. I'm glad he's out of the division though, but Javi's not there anyway. So I guess and neither is Schwarber. So there's no real fireworks left. No reason to keep him around. No fights to draw the crowd there in Cincinnati anymore. But there's nothing to draw a crowd in Cincinnati at this point. So yeah, you have to look at it and say, well, there's two of them that are gone. What have the Brewers really done? Andrew McCutchen is not the MVP level player anymore. So, what has Milwaukee done to add? What have the Cardinals really done additionally? They made their big moves last year and the year before. If you can go out and just get a couple of pieces, and now we're talking about an expanded playoff field. You don't need to win 90 games to make the postseason. And we've seen from several other teams that all you've got to do is get there, right? The Nationals got hot. The Braves got hot. Made it through. So that definitely, if the Cubs can make another couple of moves, I think they still need another arm. I think they still need a lefty bat, but that automatically vaults you into the conversation as far as the NL Central, and then beyond that, you can make some noise. The staff needs a little work. It's hard to get through the playoffs, with what they've got currently, but it's not a Herculean task to make that team into a competitive group.
What do you expect will be the way they approach Wilson Contreras? Both how many games he's going to catch versus like DH or playing out in the outfield, and whether or not they want to sign him long term?
It's up until this morning, the deal they signed with Yan Gomes was the largest they had given to a position player since Jason Hayward. Hard as that is to believe, $13 million for somebody is the most they paid since Hayward to a position player, which signals that this is not a guy that they just got to catch once every fifth day, to be somebody's personal caddy and to only be back there occasionally. I think when you look at the comments from David Ross, from Jed Hoyer, and even from Contreras himself, they've said, hey, we need to give this guy more rest. And I know that's maybe a little bit strange. You want an everyday catcher, but if we're being honest, as much as he does have value, certainly with his arm, with his athleticism behind the plate, his bat is really what makes him valuable. And if you lose that value by having him catch more frequently, then really what's the point, right? Give him a break. Let him DH a couple, 3 times a week even. Set that up so that he's put in the best position to impact the roster. And I think with what we're seeing here, the Suzuki signing, bringing Stroman in on a relatively short-term deal, that signals their need and their desire to compete quickly, which to me signals that they'd be looking to try to lock Contreras up. Because you don't, if you trade him off, that is not a sign that you're trying to be competitive. It absolutely hurts you in the short term, and really would only be something for prospects that would maybe pick up perhaps at the end of that 5-year window. So I think they need to start getting aggressive with trying to lock him in here for the next 4, 5, 6 years, whatever that might be, so they can continue to keep that window open and they know, the one thing I'll add to that too is Miguel Amaya, the top catching prospect, after really playing very little last 2 years, had elbow reconstruction. He's out this year as well. So I think you have so much uncertainty in that position moving forward that locking that in and using the DH as that extra little lever point to keep him active, keep those legs fresh, that's huge. I would be surprised if they don't have something locked in with him by the end of the spring.